Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, here with my co-host Chris. I think he wanted to be a professor at one time in his career, McNulty.
How did you know that? Actually, I did.
You will be a wonderful professor, that's why.
Until it's grade time. I'm a tough grade. But today, we're talking with folks who are always A+ in my book. Andrea and John Mighell from our Viva Learning team, who are focused on how we are introducing those solutions to our customers and to the market.
So Andrea and John are here with us to share all about you skilling up.
Yeah, question mark, question mark, question mark. Mark and Chris chat about learning options in the context of enterprise. You see what I'm doing?
You're not supposed to read the lack of notes verbatim if I'm a little slow to get those in there for you.
It's not about that. I know that, one of the things about Viva Learning is trying to get you to what you were trying to learn quickly. And one of the things that you and I sometimes do in the intro is the opposite, is a serendipitous tour of the world of sports or pop culture or what's the latest Star Wars Day innovation. And I thought maybe that's what you wanted me to do. Now I realize that was not what you wanted me to do.
Well, to be fair, we talked a little bit before we started recording. I'm a little slow on getting these show notes for the intro. We did a great discussion outline. So the conversation with Andrea and John is spot on, very well planned. And if we were to talk about some extraneous stuff, it would have to be about the latest Doctor Strange being actually listed as a horror genre film. That was awesome.
It's a Sam Raimi film. I expect nothing less.
I just thought, is he pulling from his Spider-Man or is he pulling from Evil Dead? And he definitely split the two, which was really fun. But I just have to ask, I was joking about you being a professor, but, if in the lens of you've owned many products here at Microsoft and in the context of Microsoft Viva, thinking about something like Viva Topics, there's an element where you're creating training for people to learn what is Viva Topics or what is SharePoint syntax. And that may live in something that's pretty robust, like a LinkedIn Learning course, or something that's a little bit more specific for the Microsoft field sellers or through your partner program. But do you have any context of when you think of training that you've built that would relate to then people, how they consume it?
Drawn on the fact that I actually, and you know this, Mark, the audience may not, I am a former/retired school teacher. I taught grade school for my first year after college, which led to the wonderful joke of a bunch of my fellow teachers who were in their early 60s after 1 year giving me retirement cards as you sail off into your sunset years. People have different styles of learning. Some are visual learners, some are textual learners, some are auditory learners. And the thing that I would observe is that people also have different reasons why they learn. Some people decide to learn because of something they read. Sometimes some people need to be reminded or told or just observe everyone else is doing something. And I think one of the things that I've seen customers respond to with Viva Learning is the fact that it's social. It's not just, here's the mandate, you must go do that. And it certainly supports that modality, but it also allows me to share a course with you, share a course with my team, keep tabs on what my team is doing. And that social learning feature is something that we know from customer research has been tremendously impactful. People understanding why. Mark, let's talk about the number one course in Microsoft history.
Standards of Business Conduct.
Standards of Business Conduct. And it's something that kind of, if for our audience who doesn't know, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's Standards of Business Conduct, but they have for 5 years, they film it with high production quality as a CSI-like miniseries. And people actually talk about it and get Nelson t-shirts and so on and so forth. But most of the learning that we do is atomic. I don't know what courses you're taking in the Microsoft learning realm. And some of that's driven by privacy, but it tends to be a very solitary process. As a result, I'm much less likely to ask you, hey, what did you see in the privacy fundamentals thing that may have piqued your interest? Because I don't know if you have to take that class or not. I know that I have to take that class. But the more you make those experiences visible and social, if you think about it in the real world, my son is about to bound through the door from another day at the local institutions of higher learning here. He knows who else is in his class, who else he can ask for information from. And the more we bring Viva Learning into teams, the more we empower that sort of stuff.
For me, the thing that I really have enjoyed about Viva Learning, but it also is just to the point I think you're making around this new methodology of, how people learn, how people share, making things more social, just easier to get to, easier to share. It shouldn't be such a Herculean effort to see something that you think is applicable to somebody else's job and then get them there. And to be frank, I think this also of Viva Topics, the ability to just use a hashtag to infer or send knowledge to somebody else instead of copy pasting that paragraph into the email. You can now just add a hashtag that if people, once they're learned and trained on what's beyond that on hover motion, and if you can pass through a topics knowledge experience, or if you can send somebody that's a little bit more of a standard forward approach, here is training that's been built and designed to teach you something specific. The thing that I like with Viva Learning is that once you go through kind of the check, yep, we want that service, this service, that service, we subscribe to this, that sounds interesting. A lot of those services, in addition to a lot of the custom things, are now more aligned to being shorter, easier to consume, more modularized. So, you may not need the whole thing, you just need a little bit of it. And I really like how that comes through when you share something or when you consume it. It isn't, I got to, set aside half my day and find time for it. It's more of I read a little email, I maybe answer a couple chats, I join a meeting, I do a little training, back to email, and hopefully maybe go for a walk and call it a day. But I think what comes through Viva Learning from the ones that I've taken or suggested to other people are a lot more concrete, but to your point, super easy to pass along. It's really easy.
Well, I am trying to Viva Learn from our Intrazone feedback. So I recognize that our audience may not have set aside the entire day for the podcast. So what do you say we wrap this here now and we bring Andrea and John in?
100% agree. Let us learn together. Alrighty, I think you've heard enough from Chris and I about this thing we call Viva Learning and what we think about it.
Well, I've heard enough from you, Mark.
I figured, I want to be a learn it all, but to learn it all, we got to learn from the learning team. You see what I did there? So we're bringing in Andrea Lum and John Mighell, who are focused day in and day out on Viva Learning. Andrea and John, welcome to the Intrazone.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Let's start by giving our audience a chance just to get to know each of you a little bit before we plunge into the world of Viva Learning. So let's start with Andrea. Could you talk a little bit about your role and how you came to Microsoft?
So I've been here at Microsoft for 3 years now, but over the past year, I've been working exclusively on Viva Learning. And so I'm a product marketing manager. I focus mainly on product adoption. So I look a lot into scenarios and use cases for Viva Learning, how we can use Viva Learning to set up our customers and our sales teams for success, and understanding how exactly both managers, learners, and end users are using the product itself and how we can accelerate that. So really happy to talk through any of those today and just dive into the product.
Mr. Mighell, can you give us a sense as Andrea's peer and really peer to both Chris and I, what are you doing with the Viva team and what's your focus with Viva Learning?
Yeah, so I've been working on Viva Learning, working on Viva really since the very beginning, since we first started even thinking about Viva back in it was like November of 2020, I think, was when we first started this whole concept of employee experience. So I've been on the team since the very beginning. I've been at Microsoft for a little bit over 6 years now. And then prior to that, I was in consulting, did some consulting for Microsoft and for other large tech companies. Before I came over here to the employee experience team, I was actually in our partner team, and I helped build the co-sell program and some of our other programs like SureStep. So I love doing that type of stuff. But this really, for me, is kind of a bit of a passion project. I really am interested in how to help other people grow within their roles. And I think that what we're doing with Viva Learning is kind of revolutionary in that regard. In terms of my role on the team, I'm leading our product marketing team for Viva Learning.
Excellent. Well, Andrea, you in your past life, very recently, you and I worked together a lot on lists for list adoption. And it sounds like, John, with your connection to partner, learning through your SureStep, and now what you're both doing with training and getting the word out about Viva Learning. Let's start there. You probably have done this pitch a number of times, if not a lot. But for the podcast, for people that may not know exactly what Viva is and specifically what Viva Learning is, do you mind, the both of you, maybe Andrea, give us a start and we can kind of continue a little bit with John on just the 101 elevator pitch of what is Viva Learning?
I think it helps to kind of look at the learning landscape and what learning had meant to companies prior to looking at what Viva Learning actually does now. And so learning is hugely important to organization leaders everywhere right now because of this huge job reshuffle and this shift in mindset and how people are thinking about work. And because of that, employee retention is so top of mind for all of these leaders. But we're also seeing direct correlations between employee retention and the investments that companies are making in learning. We actually have studies and statistics showing that 94% of employees would actually stay at their company longer if it invested in their learning and development. So with that kind of laying the groundwork for us at Microsoft, we saw this learning space as a really important area for us to go after. And so in doing our research and looking at how learning solutions and systems currently operate, we also noticed that companies everywhere had this really complicated learning ecosystem where they have learning content providers that they subscribe to, they have learning management systems to keep track of compliance trainings and assignments, and then they also have learning experience platforms to act as sort of front-end user platforms for their employees to interact with learning. But all of these different systems and platforms actually sit separately from the real work products that their employees are using, things like Microsoft 365 and their chat systems and email. And because of that, we are seeing really low engagement in actual learning and upskilling for the employees themselves. And so the idea for Viva Learning was to actually intertwine all of these great learning features and capabilities throughout the employees' daily work and their daily flow of work. And so Viva Learning is built specifically for Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 in order to integrate that learning throughout their daily flow of work. They don't have to step into this separate platform in order to dedicate their time to learning. They're really doing it alongside their peers and alongside their own work.
John, if you wouldn't mind, just right from where Andrea was leading to take on then, if somebody were to turn to Teams and they click on to the Viva Learning app and they start to have that new experience of a more intertwined learning experience within their chat and meetings experience, what are they going to find when they first launch the Viva Learning app?
Yeah, so what we're really trying to do, and Andrea set it up beautifully, is we're trying to reduce what has traditionally been barriers to that learning experience. Because it's really interesting, right? Like the statistic that Andrea shared about 94% of employees, that's a really interesting signal, very powerful signal. But then on the flip side, we have other statistics that show us that while employees say that they value learning and upskilling and growing, they only spend 1% of their work week on actually learning new skills. And folks listening to this podcast can probably recognize that it's really hard to carve out that time for dedicated learning activities as you're so busy with everything else going on in your work life. So what we're trying to do with Viva Learning is, and if you're playing a drinking game, drinking coffee, of course, you can count how many times we say learning in the flow of work throughout this podcast, but it really is the foundational element to what we're trying to do. So it's not necessarily about developing a whole new set of activities that no one's ever seen before around enterprise learning. It's about taking those activities that employees tell us that they want to do and that we all want to do as we kind of grow in our roles. Like, I want to be able to find my assignments easily. I want to be able to search for content that's available to me. I want to be able to share learnings with other people, my colleagues and my mentors and my mentees and even my manager and my whole team. I want to be able to browse for content and see recommendations and things that I might be interested in. It's about all of those things, but natively integrating those experiences inside the tools where you're already spending your workday. So what does this actually look like, right? The previous experience maybe was, and this is the experience for a lot of people in their enterprise learning system, they mostly get an email every quarter or every half that says, hey, you have this training, you haven't done it yet. You need to do it in the next 2 weeks or you're going to be out of compliance. Here's a link to that training, and the user gets the email, they click the link, they take the training, then they go back to their workday, right? That is enterprise learning for a lot of people. So what we're trying to do is take those experiences out and instead make it easier and more integrated into teams. So for example, you'll get a Teams notification if you have a recommendation that's been recommended to you, or a new assignment, or an upcoming due date. Or if you want to share content with one of your colleagues, Andrea and I do this all the time with each other and with our broader teams, you can just do that natively embedded into a Teams chat. So you don't have to go to a separate platform and find content over there, copy the URL, come back to your chat experience, copy that URL into your chat. Instead, it's all just integrated into a Compose extension feature built right into your Teams chat.
Kind of great to hear you walk through a little bit of that journey, because, one thing I found in talking to customers, I thought my experience was unique, that once a quarter I'd get an email reminding me that I had like 7 days to complete Microsoft's Standards of Business Conduct. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Standard of Business Conduct is this like eagerly awaited mini-series every year that they update with Nelson and a bunch of other folks at Microsoft. True story. But you used to go to that portal, and I'd always see these courses and be like, oh, managing change, team leadership. These are great things. I should come back here. And I always felt bad that I never did until the next time I got an email and had the same, oh yeah, I should probably spend more time with this.
Yeah, it's the concept, and this is what analysts have branded as kind of destination learning platforms. And that's what the sort of traditional learning management system or learning experience platform is, right? It's a destination platform outside of the places where people spend the vast majority of their workday. And the reality is your experience probably isn't, or definitely is not unique, Chris. A lot of us do those same things where you're kind of pulled into that destination platform because you have an assigned training typically. And then you go there and you go, oh, wow, there's actually a lot of really cool stuff here. Look at all these courses that are available to me and that my company invests in and spends a lot of money with subscriptions to this content. And yet, then you get pulled into your next meeting, you forget about it, and it becomes out of sight, out of mind. So what we're doing with Viva Learning is we're bringing together what we consider, this is a really important concept to land as well, is that we think about, we already have a learning platform at Microsoft. It's called Microsoft Teams, but it's just a different type of learning. It's informal and it's decentralized. But if you think about it, every day as you're going through your workday and you're chatting about content, you're in a meeting and you're collaborating on documents, all of those are learning experiences. You're learning new things, you're gaining new knowledge, you're growing within your role, but that's more informal and decentralized learning. What we're doing with Viva Learning is we're then pairing that informal learning that already exists in Teams with a more formalized element like all of that content that your company already invests in that's now stored away, sort of locked away in their learning management system that no one ever goes to. And we're bringing those alongside that informal element. So it's right there in your chat, in your Teams tabs, in your notifications, right in there as an app embedded in Teams or across your Microsoft search platforms, right? So bringing that learning content together. So we have this sort of supercharged platform, which combines that informal sort of native learning that just happens on Teams with that formalized element that your companies are already investing in.
Andrea and John, you both have mentioned content or the back-end third-party system or the existing learning management system, whatever it might be. And I know there's a lot of value in being able to combine multiple sources, but just to up-level a little bit around what learning then can represent or be that unified experience across multiple sources. Can you talk about a couple of distinct third-party content sources so people can land in your head like, oh yeah, we are invested in that. And I didn't realize that could be plumbed through the experience of Viva Learning. And maybe just a little bit of the how you set it up. If you wouldn't mind, maybe Andrea, you can talk about one or two of our distinct partners and maybe a little bit on how you set that up so that it's then available through Viva Learning.
I love the partnerships in Viva Learning. This is something that I work very closely on, and it's something that we see our customers really excited about because a lot of these names are solutions and learning platforms that they actually already subscribe to. And so we have two main types of partners and partner integrations in Viva Learning. They're the learning content provider partners that we have, and also the learning management system partners that we have. So the content provider partners include huge names like Coursera, Go1, Skillsoft. LinkedIn Learning obviously is a Microsoft source, but also integrates very nicely into Viva Learning itself. And then there's also a couple of Microsoft-owned sources like Microsoft Learn and Microsoft 365 trainings. And these all provide the actual content that's going to be discoverable, shareable, consumable within the Viva Learning app and throughout Teams and Microsoft 365. So once any of those content providers are connected into Viva Learning, which is actually a super simple process that any admin at your organization can set up in the admin center, users and learners and managers even will be able to search and discover courses and content from these sources and watch and share it within Viva Learning. Now, the second type of learning partner that we have are these learning management systems. And so our current partners include SAP SuccessFactors, Cornerstone On Demand, and Saba Cloud. And those partnerships are a little bit special because not only can you watch and consume all of the content that's connected in from those, but you'll actually also see required training assignments that are synced in from the learning management systems in Viva Learning. And so like Chris was talking about before, when he's getting these required training assignments like the Microsoft Code of Conduct or Business Conduct training, he'll actually be able to see all of those show up in his Viva Learning app in the My Learning view under things that are assigned to him. And he'll be able to see what's assigned to him from his LMS, when it's due, whether it's overdue or not. And he'll actually get a notification letting him know. So I think it makes everything really easy because it's all under one surface. And again, that surface is the one that you're already using.
Just a quick tip for our audience. If you're playing buzzword bingo, in the flow of work coming from someone at Microsoft, we mean Teams. Let's be clear. For the most part, that's what that means.
So if I heard what you said about, it's an easy setup, maybe we can just kind of check off one last thing from a scenario for IT. Your company has decided to invest more in Viva Learning, and you have some existing investments and you want them to flow through, and maybe even you might take advantage of some of the things that are available to everybody, some of the coursework that's kind of in the cloud and ready to plug in. But am I understanding it right? If I am the Viva Learning admin, if that's fair to say it that way, I would go in and almost from a checkbox experience, I want to subscribe to a few things. I may need to set up a little bit more than just that easy. But did I hear you right that if I have an opportunity to say, we have this, we have that, we don't have that, we do want that, eventually I'll be able to then present that to my employees on their behalf by just setting it up just like that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is just as easy as you're thinking, Mark. So all the admin has to do is to go into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and the list of all of our partnered learning providers and learning management systems all show up in the settings for Viva Learning there. And then all they'd have to do to connect in any of those that they have a subscription to is to check a little box next to the name of the partner and then put in a couple little details or information lines that just correlates to their own personal ID in the learning partner that they have. And so once they put in that information, and there's a ton of instruction on how to do that on the documentation page for Viva Learning, everything will automatically flow through from that partner source right into Viva Learning itself.
As Andrea mentioned earlier, there's some sources that come preloaded into Viva Learning as well. These are Microsoft sources. So you get out of the box the full library of Microsoft Learn content, you get the full library of Microsoft 365 trainings, and you get a selection of 125 courses from LinkedIn Learning for free. That all comes just standard for free with Viva Learning. And then if you in your organization have, a Skillsoft subscription, for example, you go to the admin center, you click the Skillsoft box, you enter in your client URL and client ID, and maybe one more admin login. And then once you've done that, all of your Skillsoft content flows through into Viva Learning alongside the Microsoft Learn and Microsoft 365 content and LinkedIn content. And then you've got really a pretty easy, seamless, in the flow of work, there it is again, experience for your users to start sharing and recommending and driving that social learning in, again, the Teams platforms and the Microsoft platforms where they already spend their day.
Just so you know, in the flow of this conversation, I've been taking a sip of my coffee every time you say that, and my hands are now shaking. So you are right. So from all of you, including Chris, I heard, information about how we all get our business code of conduct training now through Viva Learning, and I'll tell you, it's a breath of fresh air. First time I saw that pop up, I'm like, oh, there it is. We're actually taking more advantage of Viva Learning even internally. I get a sense that we've shared a little bit around the employee value of being able to learn, as you said, in the flow of work. And to set that up before you even roll out Viva Learning, there's, of course, an admin role to go in and subscribe or take advantage of what's available to you from a content repository perspective. Can we talk a little bit around the scenarios and the value to a manager, somebody who has a number of people on their team that may want to guide or be a little bit more distinct around what they want their specific skilling to then, permeate throughout their team? And I am stealing this from your pitch deck, the concept of fostering a culture of learning. Would you both, or maybe, starting, with one who feels the most comfortable with what is that role of a manager and how Viva Learning supports them being able to support their team?
Sure. I'll take this one, Andrea, and you can add to it. One of my favorite features with Viva Learning, and we know this is one of our favorite features of partners as well, is the ability to create a learning tab within an existing Teams channel. And that's a really cool way to bring sort of that learner board functionality right alongside where you're chatting and having Teams meetings and collaborating on different files. You can pin to that learning tab a bunch of resources from the different sources that you've connected into Viva Learning. And that allows you to have this centralized experience. And so I, as a manager, could add content to that tab, and then people on my team could add additional content to it. Once everyone's taken the course that's on that tab, we can take it off and then kind of keep refreshing that. So it's always new and fresh. Of course, there's the running sidebar chat, which is just integrated with Teams chat, where we can all talk about the trainings and what we found valuable or what we didn't find valuable. And that's just a really interesting way to drive that, again, culture of learning, like you said, but not in a separate place that we have to train people on a new UI and a new chat experience. And this is how you sign into it and all these things. You have to build your own profile, right? It's right there where you're already spending your time at work. And so that's a really cool one. Another one that I like is the recommend function. That's the ability to find a training maybe you took and you said, wow, this was really valuable for me. It was about leadership communication. And Andrea and I were just talking about our own leadership brands. So I'm going to recommend this content to Andrea because I think it was interesting. She might find it valuable as well. You can then create kind of a formal recommendation right within Viva Learning. Andrea would then receive that and see that, John's recommended a new course to me. That'll show up in her My Learning view in Viva Learning, where she can check the recommendations that other people have made to her. And then I can go to my Manage view and I'm able to see, okay, I've made this recommendation to Andrea. I've also made another recommendation to Mark and Chris. And okay, I see Andrea has started hers and Mark and Chris have not started theirs. So just kind of a lightweight way to sort of track and see what's going on with the recommendations that you've made, and also a way to just really share content that you find is valuable and you think others might find valuable as well.
And I'll add also, from an adoption perspective, going along with this ideology of driving a learning culture, we see a bunch of these manager scenarios falling under what we call a top-down approach to driving learning culture. And so that's where you kind of target the managers and the leaders at an organization, and you equip them with the tools and methods for talking about learning and sharing that learning out with their teams and anyone that kind of reports up to them. And the hope there is that this importance and this culture of learning will actually trickle down from the top down to the employees and the learners at the company themselves. And by hearing about learning kind of more and more frequently, they're more likely to engage in it with their peers and their managers and mentors.
Mark, if you don't mind, can I add one more thing? Can you tell that we're excited about this, right?
I can.
It is very cool, right? I mean, the whole concept is let's bring learning on par with all the rest of the things that we have to do as part of our day-to-day work, right? I think right now it's seen as kind of this backseat thing that a lot of people are like, okay, if I somehow make it through my entire to-do list for this week and I somehow find that I've got 5 hours at the end of the week, then maybe I'll take a little bit of that time to spend on learning activities. That's kind of how it is for a lot of people right now. What we're trying to do in this whole concept of a learning culture is, that's not how it should be. You should be prioritizing time for learning alongside all the other things that you're doing in your day. And a part of a really powerful tool to do that is to block time on your calendar and dedicate that to learning time. And then have that be a protected focus block on your calendar that, just as if you were in a meeting, right? You're prioritizing the time that you're spending in that meeting. If you're in your learning block on your calendar, you're prioritizing the time and learning new things, learning new skills. So there's this new feature that we just launched in Viva Learning a couple of weeks ago, which is our add to calendar button. So if someone, Mark, let's say you share a piece of content with me, it's an hour and 15 minutes long. I don't have time to take it right now. I can go to the details page in Viva Learning, click add to calendar. That'll then intelligently look at my calendar and say, okay, this course is an hour and 15 minutes long. So I'm going to look for a 90-minute block on John's calendar. It'll suggest times where I have free 90-minute blocks in the next week. I can select one of those. It then adds that learning object embedded into an Outlook and Teams calendar object. It's now on my calendar, and when I'm within that time frame, my status on Teams shows as focusing. I'm on a do not disturb status, so I can really prioritize that time for learning, and that helps build that learning culture and makes it, with just a click or two, that much easier to prioritize learning time and really hopefully kind of revolutionize and update the way that people think about learning as not a thing that I do if I happen to have time for it at the end of the week, but instead a real priority for me as I'm prioritizing my own growth and development within my role and as a person.
Yeah, and back to hopefully that value to managers is it is just as important for if the employee feels like this is a good 90 minutes to spend, or you're getting assigned and you just find the right time where it's appropriate for you, that it really is prioritizing, like you just said, the growth of the individual. And that is, as important as any other meeting that you would schedule for yourself. If we look at our calendars, here's how I block and protect my time. This is I block and protect my time so I can grow my skills and be more valuable to the company. Or answer that question of how do I do X and Y? I just need to learn how to do that.
Right.
That's really important. I love that that's a feature, but I also think it's a feature of if you're truly fostering a culture of learning, you have to make that priority and that we support that.
Yeah, and I think Andrea nailed it, where the messaging has to come top down from the leadership and from the managers, where we say, look, learning is very important and we want you to prioritize time for that. So that needs to come from the top down, but then from the bottom up, we also are providing you the tools that make it easy for you to do that. And then the culture within the organization to say, hey, when you look at someone's calendar and you want to find time for a meeting or whatever, if they have a booked time for learning, don't schedule over that. Right? Like that is important time for them. They're prioritizing their learning. You should respect that and look for a different time on their calendar for that meeting. Yeah. Those are shifts in the mindset that really develop that learning culture.
Before we talk about future stuff, because I think it's always fun to, what's coming next. We have established, for a little while, this Viva Learning in the marketplace, and everything that you talked about today is really up-leveling so that people are very clear on what is it today, what does it offer, and how to take advantage of it. I want to talk about what's coming next, but also just because you triggered something that I have done, I think, at least once a month using Viva Learning, but in the context of a one-on-one chat. Because I focus on Microsoft lists, there is a great LinkedIn Learning course that's basically a Microsoft List 101 course. It's very short. It's really nicely done. And anytime somebody engages me and says, hey, I hear, you've helped so-and-so create a list. Could you help me? And of course, I always say yes, because we want to, make people comfortable with using lists. But before we meet, I actually share in the chat the learning from LinkedIn Learning that's about Microsoft List. And it's super easy, just as you described. I use the functionality within chat to search and find the Microsoft List learning about Microsoft List. It puts it into the chat. They can then, if they want, save it and bookmark it for later. But for me, it's kind of like what I used to do. Here's a link to, X video or a webinar or a something. But because this is formal training, it really is meant to train them how to do something. And I will just tell you, honestly, I've used that probably once a month in that exact use case. Here's an easy way to share the learning. They consume it, I hope. If anything, by the time I meet with them, I can tell whether they did or not. But it's super easy. And what I really like about that sharing method is it does it in a very friendly visual way. Here's the title, here's a thumbnail, here's a little description, click into it and you're right where you want to be. So kudos to the learning team, but I also really liked how you frame that, especially for employees who are sharing or recommending to other employees. If that's my use case, and we've talked a lot about the what is it today, is there anything you can share, that might be just broader stroke investments or things that we're learning that we need to refine so that the Viva Learning offering is what it needs to be for our customers?
I'm most excited about some of the really great personalization features that we have coming for Viva Learning. And I think this is where the product is really going to stand out. Just being part of the Microsoft ecosystem and Microsoft, and through everything that I'm doing in work and through all these programs, all of this really great insight on what would be interesting to me is kind of being collected on the back end and also going to be used to fuel personalized learning suggestions to me from the system itself. And so being myself, and look, I've been at Microsoft for 3 years, like I'm coming out of college, I'm relatively early in career. Sometimes I don't exactly know what types of topics and subjects I should be learning. And yeah, it's great to get these suggestions from my colleagues on things to learn from these collaboration and social features, but I also want some more intelligence and some more tailored suggestions on what I should be focusing on coming from Viva Learning itself. And so as we continue to build integrations with the Microsoft Graph and with this awesome back-end platform, I'll actually be getting more of these intelligent suggestions to me on things that I should be learning and looking into based on my role at the company and my colleagues and what they're looking at and other trends like that. And I think that's what I'm most excited for.
And would it be fair to infer that off of the intelligence, it's the intelligence of the aggregate of how you've configured the system? So all the back-end sources that you've subscribed to or said yes to, it would be intelligence off of that corpus of content, the aggregate of it?
Yeah, and it's not even just activity and how I'm using the Viva Learning app itself. It's really looking at how I'm interacting with things across the Microsoft organization and the Microsoft 365 suite and things that are attached to my own profile, like my role at the company too. And so there are just all these great points of data and signals that are coming from how I'm interacting and working that are all going to be fueling these recommendations.
Cool. John, is there anything kind of around the horizon that you're able to share, similar to?
There's so much, Mark. Really, there is a lot of exciting stuff coming forward for us. And I think, let me just mention or just sort of add a little bit more to what Andrea is saying, because I think that's such a critical aspect, right? We're talking about learning in the flow of work, right? There's the 700th time we've mentioned it today.
That's me taking a sip.
I'm just trying to get you wired, Mark, for the end of the
Done.
But we realize that providing learning in the flow of work is only as valuable as the content is relevant to the end user. So if you have the most flow of work experience possible, but the content that's surfaced up to the user isn't really valuable to them and isn't really interesting or relevant to them, then that's not a good experience. So what we're really focusing on is not just the flow of work delivery, but also the content that is promoted to the user being highly relevant. And that, like Andrea was saying, is based on all those signals that we have from the Microsoft Graph. And I think this will become a real differentiator for Viva Learning, because a lot of other learning systems out there have recommendations, right? And that's kind of a standard thing that learning systems provide. But they're typically just based on what the learning system has visibility into, which is usually just what are the things that this profile, this individual has learned in the past? What's their past learner history? So at Microsoft, we have that also, but we also pair that with all the different signals that we get collected and depersonalized and aggregated in the Microsoft Graph about what else are you doing across your work experience, right? What types of SharePoint sites do you collaborate on? What types of role profiles do you work with? What's your Azure Active Directory role profile? What type of search words do you typically search for, right? All these things are signals that give us a really in-depth profile of what are you doing at work. We pair that with your past learner history, and that gives us this really valuable and rich data lake to build a highly personalized recommendation on top of. So it'll be that, and then delivered in the flow of work is really going to be kind of our special sauce. A couple of other things that I'm really excited for. One is the improvements that we're making to our SharePoint integration. So there's a number of things that we're doing there just to really improve that experience and make things like thumbnails show up better and, easier metadata tagging and just really build that to be a first-class integration experience. And then the other one that I would mention is we're building a lot of really cool integrations across the other Viva modules. So whether that's with Viva Connections and showing learning content in your Connections dashboard, or that's with Viva Topics and promoting, Viva learning cards within the topics experience, or your Viva Insights daily mail and having learning content populate and sort of promote through that. There's a lot of things that we're thinking about to make a learning more pervasive across the Viva platform. And as we deliver those things, it'll help us to, again, bring learning into the flow of work across all those different endpoints.
You used the buzzword for our audience, which is metadata. Of course, SharePoint is as one of its core foundations over many years, but also the inference of learning as a new content type, maybe not new to the world, but new to this way that it plugs into the rest of the experience in Teams, across Viva. Obviously, when you talk about Microsoft Graph, I think that should be a clear signal, literally and figuratively, of this being truly an integrated system, one that's going to be easy to share, easy to, put together those learning boards that you mentioned, as a tab in Teams, here's, 3 or 4 things that are kind of manually put onto a single board. And a lot of the ad hoc learning where you're going to come across things more in a discovery mode, which I think has been, a big thing that the Graph has been promoting through email, through content discovery, in Microsoft Stream, it's everywhere. And to hear that it's coming to learning in the context of, that specific content type, which is super important. If it resonates, I need and want to learn about that. Hopefully it's something that more comes to you as a recommendation in manual, individual, manager, or, with a little AI help. So it's really cool to hear that that's coming. And just to know what that means at Microsoft is this product is really growing in a direction that means it's much more deeply integrated into that overall employee experience, which I know is the foundation of Viva, but it's true hearing the way that you describe it. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, and it's really about, bringing learning to the user, wherever that user is, versus asking the user to go navigate to a destination platform to find learning. That's really the paradigm shift here. That's what we mean by learning in the flow of work. And that's what we're trying to deliver. And then those, the graph data that underpins all of that and makes it a highly personalized and relevant experience just makes it that much better and that much more valuable.
Yeah, so there's actually one more thing too, aside from these great personalized recommendations and everything, on the partnership side for Viva Learning. And you heard me talk about our partners already, the ones that we've already integrated in Viva Learning. We've actually got a large one coming on the way, and it's our partnership with Workday and Workday Learning specifically. So Workday Learning is going to be integrated in Viva Learning as a learning management system partner, which means it is that special type of integration where you can see not only all the content coming in from Workday Learning, but also all of the required assignments and trainings that may be assigned to you from Workday if your organization uses it, also flowing into Viva Learning under the assignments. And so we know this is a top ask from a lot of our customers. Workday is such a huge player in the learning space and a really important partner for us. And so we are working hard on getting them integrated in the product as well.
Very cool. Well, thank you both for being on the Intrazone. Thank you for working across the Viva team and probably 10 other teams at Microsoft to make this make sense as you roll this out. And it's very clear to me in using it and listening to the way you describe it. And certainly we hope that our customers consume everything that you've said and then more as far as they get to their own unique ways to connect to content. But thank you for connecting to making us become learn-it-alls alongside and in the flow of work. I think we have now, finished 2 cups of coffee, just to let you know.
Well, that's good. If any meeting that I'm in where we don't say flow of work at least 15 times, I consider to be a failure. So I think we passed that bar. But yeah, thank you for having us on. Andrea and I could probably talk forever about this, but we really are passionate about it and think that we're doing kind of revolutionary different stuff here. And hopefully we do help organizations build that culture of learning and prioritize learning as we realize that it is such an important aspect of growth and development.
Thanks for having us.
Time to move on to events. There are always a lot of events in the future, whether they are virtual or in person, whether they are hybrid or not. It's always great if you're interested in getting, like we're talking about today, learning, but that in-person, face-to-face training that has then the benefits of follow-up questions and walking with somebody down the hallway and chatting with them. And it really is a lot of opportunity in this community, always around the world, with a few coming up that we want to highlight. The first is Build 2022 is literally just around the corner next week, May 24th to the 26th. It's all virtual, and it is all very focused on the developer. And that's a pretty broad category if you're a developer. So whether you're doing Windows development, Azure development, SharePoint development, if you're thinking broadly about how to develop for Microsoft Viva and other ways to extend Microsoft Teams. There's a lot of information and news coming about Microsoft Graph, SharePoint Framework, and a lot and beyond. So Build 2022 next week. Tune in. A lot of great things that are coming from the keynote down to the breakouts, down to individual ways to engage. If you're a developer, Build 2022 is designed for you. Shortly after that, there is a conference that's mostly meant to be in person, but it also has a remote element to it from Jeff Teeper. It's the Thrive Conference. This is May 24th to the 25th, so kind of mixed in with Build, but very much focused on being a broader set of content. This is in Slovenia, and Jeff is doing an opening keynote. We've also contributed an additional set of speakers, but mostly it's driven by local content. So if you're in Slovenia or you want to dig into the Thrive Conference, there'll be a link in the show notes and on the corresponding blog. Next is Microsoft Inspire 2022, another virtual show very much in the pattern of Build 2022, but for Microsoft partners. This is July 19th to the 20th. We're right now in the middle of planning all of the content across the entire company, very much focused on how to take Microsoft solutions and products to market and really articulate the value of what they do and, of course, help implement and get to that adoption state. So Microsoft Inspire, July 19th to the 20th. The final event that we want to announce and mention is upcoming. So it's in August 8th through the 12th, will be the next 365 EduCon in Dallas, Texas. And we would like you to know that if you are interested in seeing us there or joining us in Dallas, Chris and I are actually going to be co-hosting and co-keynoting, plus doing a number of other sessions, and we're going to record a live episode of the Intrazone. So we're planning phases right now, but very excited about being in Dallas for 365 EduCon. Again, the full week is August 8th through the 12th. And that is it for events. If you are driving an event or know of an event that we haven't yet covered that is into the future, we would love to hear about it. Please let us know of your event or any that you're aware of that we have not yet covered. Thank you to our guests, Andrea and John, for being on the show, for being learn-it-alls and sharing all of their learning with us, and for making skilling a lot easier to do and understand.
Thanks to the Milwaukee Bucks for giving us a great semifinal series. I'm very proud of the Boston Celtics. And yes, I just abruptly did that instead of encouraging our audience to check out our show page. For links to everything we discussed today and more, go to aka.ms/the-intrazone.
Send us your questions and feedback, and hey, send us your learnings for the SharePoint teams. You can reach us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or via Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you so much for listening. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Class is in Session Intelligent Intranet.